Hey, good morning, Mark Mazzotti, Mr. Lister. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me today, Greg. I appreciate it.
Oh, yes. Well, I think you're having me too. So, so anyhow, hey, it's March 22nd, Friday. Last Friday, right after we got done with our Zoom call, there was some big news in real estate, wasn't there?
There was, and I'm going to dedicate all of today to that news because it is very, very significant and it affects every homeowner in America. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
What I'm going to share with our viewers and yourself today is on Friday afternoon, the National Association of Realtors settled the lawsuit, the original lawsuit with the parties in the Missouri case.
Okay.
That was the $5.8 billion landmark lawsuit that created multiple copycat lawsuits. In California, we have four copycats. The Graces in San Francisco, Fierro, Friedman are in LA, and the name slips me, but there's another case in Sacramento. So basically, the first question that we as real estate agents and brokers have is why did you settle and what does it mean for us? So the industry itself they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. The industry obviously lost the 1.8 billion, and then by the time you added potential interest and punitive damages to that, it was just under 6 billion at 5.8 billion. And that's just for the one case. Adding the multiple copycat cases throughout the country, we're starting to spiral. As I mentioned, we have four in California. Other states have similar numbers. So obviously, there's opportunists with the copycats that are looking for either a financial payday, attorneys looking for a reputation, but the bevy of lawsuits that have now hit the marketplace needed to be curtailed to protect realtors in general and to protect home sellers and home owners.
Right.
This issue had nothing to do with the services that real estate agents provide for their clients. It had only the method of compensation. So I cannot share enough that the industry, you need us to protect you. You want us to protect you. It would be like showing up to court on a life and death kind of case and you don't have a lawyer.
Right.
Not a good idea. Now, the argument is who pays for the lawyer? And that's all in similar metaphoric, what has now come down to the stance with NAR.
Right.
Okay. So they had three options. They could post the bond to appeal it. They could continue to litigate it in each of the states, or they could declare bankruptcy. Okay. Neither of those three options had any viability. The need for money meant that they would have to come up with a bond for about $5 billion. Okay. As we see in the press right now, coming up with large money bonds isn't exactly the easiest things for people who are even solvent to be able to do.
Right.
So it would tie up all of NAR's money and basically mean that none of their political lobbying, none of their legal advice, none of their contractual stuff, any of that would be able to move forward for the trade. So that made that option no longer viable. The vulnerability, well, four in California, there's multiples in other states. They had to eliminate the lawsuits. The only way they could do it was to create a class action settlement and invite the participants to become part of that class action settlement and so forth. And then the last one was bankruptcy, which is something they also do not want to do for a myriad of different reasons. So that pushed them to settle. So, what does that settlement opportunity entail? First of all, let me be real clear with this. This is a proposed settlement. It has not been approved by the judges as of yet. It is likely that they will, based on the fact that both the plaintiff and the defendant created this agreement. It was not done one sided, it was done as a negotiation between all parties.
Okay.
So, unless the judge has any serious concerns and so forth that maybe antitrust wasn't overcome, We're not saying that's a concern, but that's a possibility. We have to wait for this all to come down. We will know for sure within the next couple of months, and its effective date, if accepted, is July 1st of this year. So it's moving.
Wow.
Okay, it's moving very, very quickly. So here are the changes that will become law nationwide. States may add to this, but here are the major changes. Typically, when you go to sell a house on all MLSs, you list the compensation. That will no longer be applicable. Every MLS board now will no longer have the compensation being offered to the client directly. Now, does that mean that the sellers overnight win and they no longer get to pay buyers? No,
You're talking
that's
about
not what's going to happen.
the buyer's agent commission will not be listed on MLS. That's what you mean.
That is correct.
Okay.
No commissions will be listed on MLS of any kind.
Wow.
So, yes, it includes the buyers, but it's not just the buyers in the language. It is no commissions in the language. Okay.
So
However, go ahead.
will that so on, from my perspective as a lender, we're always looking at appraisals, looking at was there consideration from the seller to the buyer on a deal, meaning seller concessions. So if a
Right.
home sells for $1 million,
Right. And that will be addressed. And I'll get to that
okay,
when I actually break out the forms
okay,
and go through how those new forms will work. But your concern was our concern. And yes, we have a response to that. Let me just preface it by some of the other legal stuff, and we'll come back around to that. Okay. So no buyer agent commissions, no more commissions on the MLSs. But there is a caveat to this. The caveat is that if you are the listing agent for that property, you can offer compensation on your own website, not the MLS website.
hmm.
So Lister is a website, and Lister lists houses. And if you were to list your house with me and decide that you still wanted to pay the 2.5% buyer's commission so that you could get as many buyer offers as possible, we could post that on the Lister website of the featured property. We just cannot blanket it on the MLS.
Wow.
So, how well will that work? Who knows? Let me tell you what the reality is on that aspect there. Um, the new listing agreements that will be coming out will now change the verbiage on the compensation, obviously. So the verbiage on the compensation now basically in the listing is you ask the listing or you ask the sellers at the listing presentation, do you want to offer additional compensation? And it must be written in that listing agreement for the buyer's agent. So where it was 5% to be split 50-50, it's now going to be defined. Do you want to pay your listing agent how much? And do you want to pay the buyer's agent how much?
Right.
Okay. Although that's not public as of yet, that is something that now will become the norm of the negotiations. So what the industry envisions is that you have a house for sale and I have a buyer. Before I come to see that house, I call you and say, do we have room for a buyer's commission? You say, yes, we do. You may not tell me what it is. You may tell me what it is, but you can just answer it as such. And then under the new broker agreement and buyer representation compensation forms, that will be submitted prior to the purchase contract. So you send over the verification of how much they're willing to pay, in terms of commission, and you can do that with the contract. Okay, but you want to make sure that they sign that as part of the agreement. Otherwise, you won't get paid. And
Right.
then that becomes part of the actual contract itself moving forward. That can be a flat fee of $1. That can be 5% commission if they choose to pay it. Okay. Another major change, which I think is really good for the industry, but it's going to wreak havoc. Now, according to the settlement, no buyer can go out and look at houses with an agent unless the agent now has an exclusive agreement with that buyer.
No kidding.
That is part of the new law.
Wow.
Okay. Now, NAR has been pushing for this for a while, but that says unless Greg and Mark have an agreement that Mark is to represent Greg exclusively, I cannot show properties to you under the new rules. So the big question now is, what does that mean for open houses? And we don't have an answer yet.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. So that's actually I mean, I'm obviously being a lender, I know a lot of buyer's agents, and that actually is a win for buyer's agents because, the biggest complaint that I hear from buyer's agents is they devote all this time, sometimes months, sometimes over a year of showing people homes. And then they end up just going and meeting some other agent at an open house and they get convinced to sign an offer right then and there with some other agent. And there was no exclusive relationship with the original agent. And they've wasted all of that time and they lose the
Well,
client.
that changes now. Under the
Wow.
proposed settlement, that will
So,
no longer be the case.
so
They
that,
had
yeah,
opted out for a dual agency as part of that as well. However, that did not make the final cut. They wanted to eliminate dual agencies as part of it. I know there's mixed emotions about that, but from a consumer's perspective, dual agencies are not a good deal for the buyer. They're a great deal for the seller, but they're not a good deal for the buyer. And the only reason the buyer used it is, like you said, one, they don't have an exclusive agreement with the person who did all the legwork. Okay. How
right,
many times in our past pods have I complained that the system was rigged, that so many real estate agents work very long and very hard with their due diligence and never receive any compensation whatsoever? So the transparency is not only for the consumer, but it's also for the agents themselves most likely affected, and that's buyers agents.
wow,
So that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And you have to have those conversations with your buyers. Now, here is the other side of the coin. That buyer's agreement also has to stipulate your compensation regardless of who is paying for it. So the buyer will know how much money you're making
wow,
because you have to put that into that buyer's agreement, just like the listing agent knows how much money you're
yeah,
making when you sign the listing agreement.
sure,
Okay. The buyer can pay a portion of it, the buyer can pay all of it, or the buyer can pay none of it. And we can ask for that in, the offers themselves. The caveat is, again, is what you said. What do you do about lenders and so forth? And up to 3 to 6% of their concessions may be allowable, but this is going to change that dynamic. Not to mention, it's going to change the matrices on any federally approved financing, whether it is VA, FHA, Fannie, or Freddie. All their rules are probably going to have to be rewritten once this policy of the settlement is a done deal.
right.
Okay, hold on. There's more.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, wait, there's more.
These are big,
So,
big changes, Mark.
so in order for me to take a client out as of January for or July 1st of this year moving forward, I must have that compensation agreement. The other aspect that we mentioned about open houses also falls into that gray area. What about virtual tours now? How does that play in?
Hmm.
So that and open houses are still under legal review in California. So now here's where it really becomes interesting. I submit an offer to Greg for the house that Greg is selling. I know that we have spoken before, and you are offering a 2.5% commission. I then send the offer with broker compensation. Well, guess what? The seller now has the right to go back to me and say, we want to see a copy of the exclusive agreement because that puts the cap on what the commission would be. So let me share with you how that may work. Okay.
Mhm.
We call up and we find out that they have a commission non-disclosed, but they're offering a commission. So they're not telling us how much that you're offering, but they're offering a commission. So we say, what the heck? Let's shoot for the rainbow or the stars. And we go in and we ask for 3% for compensation. But I only agreed to 2.5% on my buyer's agreement before we started to show homes. Now they've accepted the offer at 3% commission to me.
Wow.
Well, two things had to have happened. The first thing is they needed to see the original with 2.5%, and then they needed to see the amendment where the buyer approved the additional compensation. So now the seller has the right to see all of the buyer's compensation agreements, again, part of transparency. So I know that may be problematic to a lot of agents. However, with what we've looked at moving forward, I think that what we did was anticipate what the market changes would be. We created a brand to address those. And now it looks like what's happening is aligning to what we perceived was going to happen.
Right.
And right now, we have to define our scope of services to not only the listing agents, but also to the buyers. So those are the new rules.
That's quite a lot to unpack. And
And there's still more that's
still
in the
more.
gray
Yeah.
area that needs to be defined as well. So I'm going to share with you just some of the opinions and some of the feedback that I have had through my colleagues within the industry on what their take is on this whole settlement.
Yeah, please do.
And we can kind of comment on it. Okay. But from an industry perspective, the first thing that real estate agents across the country are upset about in this agreement is that it is all one sided for the seller. There is no addressing of the first time homebuyer needs or programs to alleviate those. And if it goes the way it is without any modifications, they will destroy the first time homebuyers market. I 100% agree with that. Absolutely. There is no way that somebody who's looking for a no money down VA program is going to come up with 2%, 2.5% to pay me. So now the ominous is on the sellers. The sellers will then need to make that compensation.
Hmm.
Okay. So right out of the gate, this settlement screws homeowner or screws home buyers more than anything else because it forces them to do things that they may not be capable of. And in fact, the marketplace where we're most sensitive for corporate greed to just ruin home buying opportunities is exactly the segment that's going to get shut out. So, what do you think is going to happen? The corporate Wall Street companies are going to come in and are going to buy all those entry level homes all over again and start raising their rates. Okay. That's what the industry's afraid of.
Yeah. Well, it's a very viable, likely outcome.
Now, I've spoken to other folks who sit on the board of directors for some of these organizations that I know very well as indeed. The likelihood of this dramatic change, meaning that buyers are always going to now have to pay forward, is probably less than 10% viable according to their views. We are seasoned agents, we are seasoned negotiators. Not providing compensation to a buyer's agent, although you may think you have the upper hand, means that that buyer's agent will probably leave your property for another property, regardless of market conditions. And since the buyers can no longer see a property after they've signed an exclusive agreement, they can, but they can't just go see them now on their own. And that's why that exclusive agreement now needs to be signed to prevent any of lateral movement by buyers who think, oh, well, we can do this, or oh, we'll get a better offer from the listing agent, or any of those things. You don't have to pay a commission. Just let me, you can work both sides, kind of stuff. And that's what they're trying to do is eliminate that.
So wait,
Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but I can tell you they're not going to give up their 2.5% on the buy side. Every seasoned agent is going to negotiate that as part of their deal. So maybe the structure changed, but is the compensation going to change across the board? I don't think so. I think we're going to have a short-term blip, and then I think the industry is going to figure out how to maintain those profit levels.
So how does it work then? Okay, so if there's a buyer's agent and they sign that exclusive buyer's agent agreement and they're after 2.5% to represent a buyer, um, and then the buyer is online looking at Redfin, Realtor.com, Zillow, etc. Because you can't stop these websites from promoting real estate. So they see it, they see a ton of listings in their market. And they start emailing the buyer's agent these listings, and the buyer's agent is just hammering the phones, talking to all these listing agents, saying, "Hey, is the seller offering a co-op on the buyer's agent commission?" And so let's say the buyer sends 10 properties to the realtor that they're interested in looking at, but only 6 of them have the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent commission. Well, what about those other 4? So does the buyer, because they signed that exclusive relationship with that buyer's agent, if the buyer's agent doesn't want to show them those properties because there's no way to get compensation on it, does the buyer just miss out on looking at those properties? Like, how does that work?
Yes and no. Okay, every buyer's different. Okay, but under the proposed settlement, when you negotiate that, the first thing that we will do as a brokerage ourselves, and I won't speak for anybody else, is that compensation agreement under the exclusive buyer's arrangement
Mhm.
will stipulate how much the buyer can afford to pay out of their pocket as an option should the seller decline any commissions whatsoever.
Got it.
So if the agent does not do that at the very beginning, yeah, they're going to be working for free. And the industry doesn't like that. That's one of the hard pills to swallow. But based on where we're at, we have to swallow some hard pills in order to move forward.
Right.
And the other pills that were in front of us are far worse than this. This is something that's part of the negotiations.
And then
And that
how does-
seemed to be the key of the attorneys, is that there's not enough negotiation between all parties going on. We want more negotiate
and
for financial
transparency.
concessions.
Yeah, and transparency. So
Yep.
what about new construction? That's a how's that gonna work? Because I mean,
There's
there's a
no
lot of
answers to that yet. That's also in that gray area. Remember, we're a week into the settlement.
come on, Mark,
So
I want
over
answers.
time,
I
yeah,
want
over
answers.
time,
Yeah,
yeah, some of these things will be ironed out. New construction homes, open houses, virtual tours, all of those
yeah.
things. Right now, we don't have definitives because all of the real estate attorneys, state and nationwide, are all working together to create viable solutions moving forward.
Wow.
So the overall feel is it's a new way of paperwork, but not much is going to change in compensations.
Okay.
That's the thought process.
Okay. Well,
Now, having said that, we offer the opportunity of individual services for sellers. Well, guess what? Beginning hopefully next week, we will have buyers menu item services available as well, as kind of moving forward, knowing this is going to be the trend that's going to have to, be in place before July 1st.
well, this industry, I've been in it 22 years. I think you're about the same, and all we've seen is change. I remember when TRID happened in lending, and there was a big upheaval there, and yes, it changed the process, but it didn't.
I remember this company
Didn't.
called Zillow, and what do you
Oh yeah,
mean? We're going to lose real estate. Nobody's going to use realtors and so
yeah,
forth. But I think the ones that are going to be hit the hardest are going to be the Zillows and so forth. How about Redfin as a discount broker? How badly will they be hit? I don't know. They may actually get hit less than maybe say Remax or whatever because of the fact that they allow discounting, on their listings. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting because that is absolutely that key piece about being able to put the commission on your listing pages. That was the strength of the industry's attorneys. You know that. And if you don't know that, let me share with you why that is the case. Because the big boys still control 85% of all the deals in America. So if they put all of the compensation for 85% of the deals in America on their website, in essence, what they're doing is they're creating an opportunity for the agents just to go to the big brokerages to see what the compensation offer is, or a new way of sharing that data by linking, Remax to whatever, to this person, to that person. The
Right.
ones who really get caught in this are the mid-level brokerages around that $2 billion a year annual, because if they're under $2 billion a year in annual sales, they have to opt in to this program. If they're under 2 billion, I believe there is a formula for what their fee would be. And if they're over 2 billion, there is absolutely a settlement formula that they have to pay in. So if you're a mid-range local kind of, a real estate company, that's a regional company, a Sacramento based, a Bay Area based, and so forth. Yeah, if you want protection, you have to opt in and you have to pay.
Wow. Wow. Big changes. It's yeah, I mean, it is our industry. I'll just, we have to understand these types of radical changes are a thing in real estate and mortgage, and we just gotta move with the tide, so to speak. But
Well, and the
carry
quickness
on.
of this, yeah, I mean, the quickness of this and why this is moving so fast is we want July 1st to absolutely be the new date where the new agreement terms actually consummate. Because if not, you can continue to see more and more of these copycat lawsuits starting to come into play. The statute of limitations for the lawsuit is basically 2019 to 2024. That's what they want. So by that saying is from July 1st moving forward, nobody can sue a realtor for any of those transactions moving forward for what they could sue them up to that point. Now, obviously, fraud, et cetera, and those things are a whole different aspect, but not for this particular issue about compensation.
Wow.
So that was definitely the big companies that did that by putting, that clause in that they could do that.
Pretty amazing. Well,
So
thanks
the
for
question
covering
is,
that.
will Zillow be able to do the same thing? No, they're
Huh.
not the brokerage, but Redfin could on all of Redfin's listings. Remax could, Coldwell Banker could, Compass could. So it's more to drive them back to the brokerage websites.
Wow.
And the brokerages were smart enough to realize that this was the opportunity through the legal perspective to do that. Now, that's my opinion based on what I'm seeing and sharing. So prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for unpacking all that, Mark. Yeah, this has been a really good little episode here, but more to come. This is
More to come.
every week. This is gonna just continue to develop. I'm excited to hear what comes next week.
Hopefully it'll be better news week after week. In terms of the real estate markets, that news is that it's continuing its growth, albeit slow. The question is, how much negative impact is this news going to have on people who want to buy a house? And that, I guess, is left to be determined. I
Yeah,
wish I had a crystal ball for that one.
yeah. Well, we'll see. We shall see. Well, on
But
that
we will.
note, we're gonna wrap this up. We're almost out of time. So thank you, Mark, for sharing all of that and doing all of your research and due diligence. That was a lot of information. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have an incredible weekend, and to anyone who's watching this, I hope you have an incredible weekend as well.
That's it. That's it. And go out and look for that dream house.
Oh yeah.
See you guys later.
Bye-bye.